Warhammer Underworlds, Warbands, Bladeborn fighters, whatever you want to call them, my number one most requested video topic that I basically get every week is how can I start playing Warcry with Warhammer Underworlds models. So that's all we're going to cover today. I'm going to talk about Warhammer Underworlds. I'm going to talk about the fighters themselves. I'm going to talk about the different warbands that you can get into using your Warhammer Underworlds fighters. So hopefully by the end of this, you will know exactly how to get into Warcry using those fighters and where you can go from there. Before we begin, if you do want to throw some support my way, please don't forget to like and subscribe. You can join me here on YouTube as a member. You can join me over on Patreon, where you'll get to see exclusive behind-the-scenes content. You'll get to see stuff I'm working on next, and you'll get early access of my videos before anyone else gets to see them. Finally, if none of those are for you, you can check me out on Streamlabs, and you can offer some support that way. Okay, so you want to play Warcry, you already play Warhammer Underworlds, and the question that you're asking yourself is, how can I use my existing models to play the game without having to go out and spend a whole ton of money on more models, more rules, more everything? So in Warcry, that's where the concept of Bladeborn come in. Bladeborn are effectively your Warhammer Underworlds warbands and the fighters from those warbands, and it's a whole section of rules that allows you to use those fighters in your games of Warcry. Now, if you are a little bit more established in the game and you do have additional Warhammer Underworlds fighters that you do actually want to use, I urge you guys to check out my video up here where I talk about Bladeborn, how to use them, and what you need to do in order to actually play them in your games. If not, and you're starting fresh from Warhammer Underworlds, let's get strapped in. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is download the rules for the game. Those are freely available over in Warhammer Community. You can go and check them out to download. And then you're going to need rules for your actual Bladeborn warbands themselves. Now, those are published fairly regularly in White Dwarf. Alternatively, for some of the older Warhammer Underworlds teams, you can check out the old Tome of Champions. But if you don't want to bother with any of that, I would urge you guys to go check out warcry.net. You'll have the rules for every existing legal Warcry model on there, including all of your Underworlds models, and it will give you all of their rules and how to play them. The first thing that I want to show to you guys, if you're coming in brand new to the game of Warcry, or alternatively, if you are a bit more experienced, but you just want to play much smaller scale and more smaller scale battles, you can use the rules for Bladeborn battles. These were originally printed in White Dwarf 477, so this was a little bit before the current edition of Warcry was released, but I still feel like for missions that are designed to work on a slightly smaller scale with slightly fewer models, I think they're still fine, and I think it's something that you can jump straight into. If you do want to play, let's say you've got a couple of friends, some of them have Warhammer Underworlds models, some of them are coming in with their Age of Sigmar collection, and you want to play two kind of roughly balanced warbands against each other, you can use the rules that we've got up here. The only real hard and fast rule is that you should stick to at or around 600 points, because that's whereabouts most Warhammer Underworlds warbands sit, anywhere between 500 and 600 points, I found. And also try and keep it with no more than 9 fighters, because you don't get very big Warhammer Underworlds warbands, and similarly when they translate into Warcry, you don't get very big warbands because of that. So around about 600 points and around about 9 fighters, just try and make it as even as possible. So what was published in White Dwarf 477 was a series of 3 battle plans or missions that you can use. I've got them here. Big shout out to Optimal Game State for bringing these to my attention. They did a video on this possibly a year ago now. I'm going to put the link up here if you guys want to go check that out. But yeah, for a summary of this, we've got our 3 missions. The first one is Site of Power. It's going to ask you to draw a terrain card as normal and a twist card as normal. If you don't want to use either of those, just set up your terrain as you normally would, and don't bother with the twist if you're just getting into the game and you're just beginning. Essentially, it's a very straightforward game where you've got 3 objectives. Each player is going to score 1 objective point for each objective they control, and it tells you how that happens. The game's going to last 4 games, and whoever has the most victory points wins. So very simple, very straightforward. If you've got smaller warbands, you're only fighting up 3 objectives, so that's a little bit better. One of the problems you have when you scale up to full-blown Warcry is that you might have missions with massive amounts of objectives, and that really gives an advantage to much bigger warbands over much smaller ones. But when you're playing on this scale, it really doesn't matter. The second battle plan is Beset. So again, terrain, twist card, you're going to draw them as normal. If you don't have any of that, don't worry about it. Terrain, I would suggest that you do get a small amount of terrain just for these beginning games. Something with a little bit of verticality to them I find is always nice. So if you have some Age of Sigmar buildings, maybe bridges, walkways that you can climb up onto, I think that's pretty good for your games of Warcry, simply for playing the game and learning how the game works. And for this one, the battle immediately ends if all of the fighters in a single warband's dagger and shield are taken down, so you are encouraged to go and kill your opponent's dagger and shield. Otherwise, the game is going to go on for 4 turns if that doesn't happen, and then when the battle ends, you add up the total points value of enemy fighters taken down, and the player with the higher points value wins the battle. So this is what's known as a kill mission, where your objective is basically to go and kill your opponent's stuff. In terms of balance between larger and smaller Bladeborn warbands, generally your fighters will be a lot better than bigger warbands. So they will, despite your dagger, hammer, and your shield being much smaller than your opponents, they will generally have an easier time of killing enemy fighters. So that's kind of where the balance is in this. But again, you're just starting out. Games are much smaller, so I think this is absolutely fine. The last battle plan that we're going to be looking at is Scattered Spoils. Starting with the player who won the priority roll, alternate placing treasure tokens until there are 6. And then what you're going to be doing is your fighters are going to be going up for that treasure tokens and digging to see if there is an actual piece of treasure there. You're going to roll a dice. If it's a 3 or more, the fighter has found a piece of treasure, they get to pick it up. If they hasn't, you remove the token. And then if you keep on digging and you don't find your treasure tokens, if there are only 3 treasure tokens left on the battlefield, then those 3 are automatically treasure, and that's what you're going to be fighting over. The game is going to last 4 turns again. Whoever has the most treasure tokens is going to be the winner. Each one of these 3 missions gives you an idea of the different kinds of victory conditions that you will be seeing in Warcry. The first is going to be an objective-based mission where you go and get objectives. The second is a kill mission where you have to kill things. And the third one is a treasure mission where you have to go and get treasure. If you're just starting out in the game, I think they're pretty good just for teaching the core concepts of the different kinds of missions and how you would want to play them. They're really designed for these much smaller warbands that you get out of Warhammer Underworlds. But once you've played these a few times and you want to get into the game proper, you can expand out your collections and then you can go onto either the missions in the mission cards or into the match play missions from any of the number of battle packs that Games Workshop has put out. Now, if you do want to go on from here and you want to know how to expand your Bladeborn collection into your full game of Warcry, I'll put a link up here to my how to start video. That'll tell you exactly what you need to play in terms of terrain, in terms of rules, in terms of models, and it'll give you an overview of the different kinds of warbands that you might want to expand your existing Underworlds collection out into. The next question that we're readily asked is, which Underworlds warbands are the ones that we need to go for? Because truth be told, a lot of them are pretty bad. A whole bunch of them, especially some of the older ones, haven't had their points updated for this edition, so they're still running on the old pointing algorithm from Warcry 1.0. But the question is, what are we going to bring? And especially if you are a Warhammer Underworlds player, which warbands should you be looking to invest in when you go into the game of Warcry proper? So that's what this segment is about. We're going to look at all of those warbands. We're going to take a look at the best warbands for different factions, and I'll tell you a little bit about those warbands and the fighters that you want to be bringing in them so that you're well prepared during your list building. Okay, first up we have Beasts of Chaos. Beasts of Chaos, the Bladeborn warband that you're really going to be looking at is Grashrak's Despoilers. It is 6 fighters, 630 points if you wanted to take all of it. The reason why I like Grashrak's Despoilers is that you have Grashrak Fellhoof. He is a wizard in the context of Beasts of Chaos, so he's going to have access to the very powerful pull ability. You're going to pick one of your opponent's fighters and then you're going to pull them towards you. And then the reason why you would be looking at it is because of Corsh the Sneak and Murgoth Halfhorn. They're very cheap at 65 points. Their stats are pretty good. They've got spears, which is nice. So they've got that little bit of extra damage in there. Again, they're Beasts of Chaos. But that package with Grashrak, Corsh, and Murgoth actually gives you access to maybe some cheaper chaff and abilities that you might not otherwise have if you're playing a Chaos Warband. So that's really going to be the core if you decide to expand this Warband out. You're going to take Grashrak and the 2 Ungor with spears. You can expand this out fully. 600 points isn't a whole way off of the 1,000 points that you'll be playing normally. You can add something like a Fulmari Crusher. You can go further into Beasts of Chaos, and you can add maybe one of the Minotaurs, and you could add things like Bestigors to this to round this out to 1,000 points, and it's perfectly serviceable. Ushgor and Garl are generally overpointed for what they are, simply because they have bows, but overall they bring some nice things to a Chaos Warband that you decide to go with. Next up, we're going to look at Ephelim's Pandemonium. Just under 500 points for the 5 fighters, which is pretty good. They're all decent. Flamespooler is probably the worst one out of all of them. But the interesting thing that they bring, we're seeing a lot more of Ephelim's in competitive play now, is they really give some interesting tricks to your warbands that you just don't see anywhere else. The main gimmick of Ephelim's Pandemonium is that they have an ability whereby they can switch places with each other and do like weird teleporting shenanigans, get into combat, do some attacks, teleport out, swap with another guy who would already be in combat, attack again. They have the Stairfish, which is again a pull. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I think they're a very good control-y style warband. They're very tricky to use, but they're very rewarding to use once you get that playstyle down. You can expand these out in a whole manner of different ways. One of the recent top lists at Warhammer World was using these guys with Slave to Darkness, and that was done to very good effect. If you want to check out that list, up here I'm going to put my tournament review so you can see that, and then you can hear from the creator and the pilot of the Warband itself as to how exactly it works. If Slaanesh is more your thing, we'll be looking at the Dread Pageant. The Dread Pageant has one thing very good going for it, and that is Slake Slash. He is extremely efficient for the amount of damage he does. He's very fast, and he will be able to run in there, and he'll basically be able to mince small fighters. Vasilak the Gifted, your hero that you see here at the front, he's not terrible. I actually quite like him for 205 points. I think he brings a lot to the party, especially if you wanted a little bit tougher hero for your warband as opposed to maybe something else. Glisette with the glaive in the back, she's fine. She's just a little bit squishy because she doesn't have all that many wounds to her name or that much toughness. And Hanzo is also okay. He's an archer, but he's going to be paying for that archery tax. Scaveng's Playback have some very interesting abilities going on. They can lock down areas of the battlefield. They can taint objective markers to do damage to your opponents. Defensively, they've got some interesting abilities whereby if your opponent attacks them, they can reduce the amount of damage they take by reducing the amount of attacks that your opponent goes in. Their stats are fine. They've got some additional action economy going on whereby Skabic can copy the actions that his basic Skaven do, so that's always a plus. 635 points for the 6 fighters, I think is a nice start to a Skaven warband if you wanted to go. You could expand it out. You could buy some Storm Fiends for a bit of extra punch. I think they're a decent start for a warband, and they bring something that Chaos warbands generally aren't able to do, which is big area zonal control. Going into Nighthaunt, there are only 2 main warbands that you need to concern yourself with. Those are the Thorns of the Briar Queen and the Headsman's Curse. The reason being is that the 2 heroes from those warbands are some of the best heroes that Nighthaunt have on offer. Starting with the Briar Queen, she has a single target ability that can do a whole load of damage. You're going to be rolling a number of dice equal to the dice value, and for each roll of a 4 or more, you're going to do 3 damage to the target fighter, and then on top of that, for each one of those successes, you're going to reduce the move of that fighter by 1. So if you consider that most fighters in the game are sitting at movement 4, possibly even movement 5, even if you only get 2 or 3 successes, those movement 4-5 fighters go down to movement 2-3, and then suddenly they're a lot slower and they can't get there on the battlefield. It's single target control with damage on top of that. She's pretty tough. She is toughness 5, she has 22 wounds, and she has the fly of Nighthaunt. So that's what I'd be going for. She's my favorite ally to bring in Death Warbands. Similarly, with the Headsman's Curse, you have the Wielder of the Blade. He's got a bonus move. He's got a net if he gets into combat with someone to stop them from moving away. And if we're using the Divine Blessings rules, my video of which will be up here, he will be able to get a bonus attack, which suddenly boosts his damage potential quite substantially. And for 200 points is what he ends up at with that bonus attack. He is a very fine addition to your Nighthaunt warbands. The fighters that we're probably going to be looking at are the Sharpener of the Blade and the Bearer of the Block. The Bearer of the Block represents a decent enough upgrade to your standard Maimorn Banshee. It's got a few extra wounds, it's got a little bit of extra damage, and then you've got the Sharpener of the Blade, which is the cheapest fighter that Nighthaunt can bring at 80 points. So if you are stuck for points, you can always throw the Sharpener in there and fill your numbers that way. The 2 characters themselves, Briar Queen and Wielder of the Blade, they make excellent allies for your existing Death Warbands. So if you wanted to play something like Soulblight Gravelords, or you wanted to play Flesh Eater Courts, you can throw both of them in there, get your single target disruption, get your single target damage, and yeah, between the two of them, they'd be pretty good. It is also worth noting that as Nighthaunt characters, they have access to spectral summoning, which allows them to bring back fighters that have already died. Soulblight Gravelords get access to that, but only in very limited circumstances. But both of these Nighthaunt characters can bring back anyone, whether they're a hero, whether they're a chaff unit, whether they're minions, whatever. They can bring it back, and they can fight in later turns. Talking about Soulblight Gravelords themselves, there are 3 options that you have that are very, very good. There's the Exiled Dead, the Sons of Elmorn, and the Crimson Court. The Crimson Court comes in the Warcry starter set, so there'll be a lot of them rolling around. What you're really looking at out of this box is Prince Duval, but I have seen lists just using all 4 of them, supplemented by a box of skeletons, and they've done relatively well. Both the Exiled Dead and the Sons of Elmorn fill a very specific niche. If you are looking for cheaper fighters in your warband, maybe you're running something like Nighthaunt and you tend towards the more elite side and you're struggling to get numbers in, both of these 2 warbands will do that for you. The Exiled Dead has Daintelos the Exile. I've been using him a lot recently, and I've found that he's very good. He's got a very good high strength, high damage ranged attack, which isn't something that you really see in Death at all, let alone in other Grand Alliances, so he's real good. And then if we look at the electric zombies themselves, Coil, Ion, Bolt, Flash, all 4 of them, they all have 10 wounds, which is great. They all have movement 4, which is faster than normal zombies. They all have the minion rune mark, which means that they can be brought back to life with Daintelos, which is excellent. And then on top of that, they can get bonus moves because they have the minion rune mark. And then finally, they have an ability whereby they can roll a bunch of dice at their opponent, and they will do more damage depending on how many of them are in base contact with that enemy fighter. So as a package, I really like them. I like bringing Daintelos, Coil, Ion, Bolt, and Flash. If you have the points, and if you wanted just an extra chaff model in there, maybe to just stick onto objectives, you could bring Regulus as well. I personally wouldn't bring Prentice Markov, but the 7 of them make a very strong core to any kind of Death Warband that you want to make. Similarly with the Sons of Elmorn, they are 5 fighters. You've got Thane, Marshal Falk, and Helmor are the main fighters that we're going to be looking at. You've got to take King Morlach if you want to take them, unless you're playing pure Soulblight Gravelords. But the idea is, they are Graveguard, and Graveguard are some of the most efficient troops in the game in terms of the amount of damage they can do, which is fantastic. And again, they're cheap. 70 points, 65 points, and 60 points for Thane, Marshal, and Helmar specifically. So basically, you will never go wrong having them in your warband. The 3 Graveguard themselves have a better version of Onslaught to get more attacks if other of them have already fought. They can be brought back to life again because they have the minion remark, and they get all of the other bonuses that they get anyway just for being Soulblight Gravelords. Going into Gloomspite Gits, we have Zarbag's Gits, right? If you have these guys, the main guy you're buying them for is Prognanetter. He is 50 points, and he is cheaper than your normal net equivalent by a good margin. If you have them anyway, and you don't just want to buy them for Prognanetter, I think they're fine for the 6 fighters that you get. They are a little bit expensive. I would probably look to cut a bunch of them out if you are trying to expand out into a proper Gloomspite Gits force, but otherwise, they're absolutely fine. They're a decent base warband for Gloomspite Gits. Going into Kruleboyz, if you are a Kruleboyz player, the Cunning Crew is probably what you want. What you have in here that you don't get out of other factions, unless you're going to be bringing in something like the Boggle from the Gobblepalooza, is nets. Both Torka Toughskull and Shank both have access to nets, and if you're playing Kruleboyz itself, they are cheap enough that you can just throw them in there to have access to those abilities without having to use any of your allies' allowance. I think overall they're pretty good. You see a lot of use of Shank and Gikit being only 55 points. If you're going to be playing Kruleboyz anyway, they are some of the cheapest chaff units that you can get. So as the core of a warband, especially if you want to play Kruleboyz, I think they're very good. Next up, going into Ogre Mawtribes, we have Hrothgorn's Man-Trappers. The main thing about Hrothgorn is he's a cannon. He will point at a thing and he'll do a whole bunch of damage to it. Similarly, we're going to bring Quiv and we're going to bring Bushwhacker. Quiv on a triple will give Hrothgorn an extra shooting attack, so he'll be able to get even more value out of his crossbow. And then we've got Bushwhacker, who does something very unique in the game of Warcry. He gets to put a token down, and anyone who moves within range of that token gets eaten by the bear trap and takes a whole bunch of damage. Again, 45 points and 40 points for Quiv and Bushwhacker are very cheap options if you are looking for those kind of chaff units. Hrothgorn Man-Trapper at 300 points, I think is well worth it. He's got a ton of wounds, 40 wounds. He's got toughness 4, so he's going to last a while. I did do a video with Rob, who took a version of this to very good effect last year at one of the major events in the US. Videos up here if you want to check that out. We will go through that list. We'll go through exactly what he brought in it, why he brought it, how it works, etc. If you are playing Order, you've got a bunch of different options. You've got Order Reserve here with Hexbane's Hunters. I've been raving about Hexbane's Hunters a lot recently, and the reason is Quiet Pock. So we're going to bring Pock. Pock's shooting attack is something that you do not find elsewhere in Order. It's only 2 shots, but it's strength 4 and it does 3/6 damage, which is very good. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using Divine Blessings to boost that attack up to strength 5. So suddenly it's wounding most things on 3s. And then you have a very credible ranged option to start taking out opposing fighters earlier on in the game. Pock also has an ability whereby if she hits with her crossbow, she's going to get to do a whole bunch of splash damage to things near her. So again, gives that kind of horde control that you don't otherwise find in Order Warbands. Haskell Hexbane himself, he's pretty good. He's just an all-round decent fighter for 125 points, 20 wounds, has a ranged attack, has a very good melee attack, has the ability to boost his critical damage depending on the value of the dice. And then on top of that, he can come with Grotbiter and Rat Spike, which are 2 very cheap, very efficient chaff models for any kind of warband that you're running, if you're running with Haskell. Amos and Bridget, they're not bad. It's just generally speaking, you'll be able to find better fighters in faction if you're bringing them in as Bladeborn. So generally you're going to drop them. But yeah, overall, for the 6 fighters that you get, they make a very fine core to any kind of Order Warband. For Seraphon, we're going to be talking about the Starblood Stalkers. You get 6 fighters in here: Kixitaka, Planktrock, Huachi, Otapatl, Tok, and Zepik. The ones that I like to use are Kixitaka, Huachi, Otapatl, and Tok. I don't generally like to use Zepik because I don't think he brings enough to the fight. Huachi, Otapatl, and Tok are all very good. They kind of run off of the old Warcry 1.0 pointing algorithm, where they are not paying nearly as much for their movement 6 as other similar fighters. So if you had something like Otapatl, who is the chameleon skink back there with his blowpipe, you would be looking easily at around about 100, 110 points for his kind of stat line, but you're getting that at a discount. So that's really the main reason why people bring the Starblood Stalkers, is that you can take a whole bunch of extra fighters at a much better discount and much cheaper than you might otherwise be able to. 90 points, 80 points, 80 points, and 65 isn't terrible for the points cost that you're paying. You get a whole bunch of different mobility options because all the skinks are movement 6. They can get anywhere they need to on the battlefield. Otapatl has a bonus double that allows it to get a bonus move, which is very good. And then Kixitaka, as a kind of support caster, has actually quite a bit of utility. He's got a 9-inch AoE bubble, and 9 inches is huge on a Warcry board. And what that's going to do is give your fighters within that bubble +1 move and +1 toughness. Your skinks, they're not really going to get much use out of it because they're only toughness 2 anyway. But any other fighters that you have, going up +1 toughness and then going maybe from movement 4 to movement 5, movement 3 to movement 4, suddenly makes for a very credible fighter in Kixitaka. And 125 points is cheap enough that you can keep it and you can throw it into your warband. It's got 18 wounds, which isn't bad. Toughness 3, which is middling, but all of them being Seraphon, they all get the Seraphon reaction, whereby they can reduce the amount of critical hits that they take by up to 2. That makes them stick during your games much more than their poor stats would otherwise show. If we are talking about Stormcast, no conversation would be complete without talking about Kalthia Zandire and Zandire's True Seekers. Zandire is basically what you'd be looking to take out of this. Doraz is not terrible for 165 points, but Kalthia is really what you're taking. The reason being is that she has an ability on a triple where she gets to pick a number of friendly fighters within 9 inches, and 9 inches is a long way, that can make either a bonus move or bonus attack action, depending on the value of the dice. She's basically ubiquitous. She is everywhere. You're going to see her in shooty lists to get more efficiency out of those shots. You're going to see her in slow lists to get more efficiency out of those slow fighters by giving them extra move. By herself, she's not terrible. 5 attacks, strength 4 with a 2/4 damage profile is pretty good. Recently, I'd like to bless her up with bonus extra damage, so suddenly she becomes this mini mobile blender. She does have movement 5, which is a bit quicker than normal, and you can see it by the amount of lists in order to bring her. She's a very popular choice. If you were going to start a warband with Xandar's Truthseekers, I'd be looking to get rid of Taros first. I think Taros is very much overcosted for what you get. Secondly, you'll be looking to get rid of Luxor Stormrider. Range attacks in this game aren't super fantastic, but as the core of a warband, Calthea, Luxor, and Doraz aren't entirely terrible. Comes to just over 500 points, so there's plenty of space for additional things. Finally, for Sylvaneth, we are going to talk about Skaith's Wild Hunt. Again, for very much the same reasons as the Starblood Stalkers, why would you take Skaith's Wild Hunt? Well, you get access to some cheaper chaff. 80 points, 80 points, 70, 70. So if you're playing something like Stormcast, where your cheapest guy is going to be sitting at 130 points, you can take a bunch of these guys instead and have them fill out your numbers. Individually, they're not terrible. The guy with the horn there, he has an attack boost to everybody within 3 inches, which is pretty decent, especially if you are running Stormcast and you are running lower attack but very high damaging fighters. You can kind of sit him behind your battle lines and then you can have him boost your fighters that way. Skaith is okay. He's fairly quick, being a centaur. We all love centaurs. His range attack is fine. But yeah, mainly you'll be taking it for that attack damage boost and just the ability to take extra numbers in your warband. Okay, and that's it from me for today in terms of how to start Warcry with your Warhammer Underworlds warbands. I hope it's something that has been interesting and useful to you. I hope that it offers you a gateway into Warcry as a whole and into the larger game, because the game itself is fantastic. The barrier to entry is really, really small, especially if you have started with Warhammer Underworlds anyway. Normally, you'll be able to find 2 or 3 warbands to just smash together to get what is ultimately a fairly decent Warcry force, and you'll be able to continue your Warcry journey from there. But yes, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comment section below what you think about just running Warcry games with Bladeborn or on that smaller scale. If you think there are any Bladeborn warbands that I have missed or any individual fighters that I've missed, please put that down in the comment section. I'd love to hear it, and then we can get it added for a future edition of this. Or else, if you think I'm completely crazy and what I've said is basically a whole pile of garbage, I'd like to hear that also. But yes, anyway, thank you very much for watching. I've been Itan, this has been Off Meta Musings, and I'll see you next time.